On the topic of water, we met Paul Mutahunga, and he had a really nice plot by a river, and not coincidentally, he had a really good seedling survival rate. His land was flat, and we asked him about how, because we've heard that lots of farmers have had difficulty with, not meeting their targets. And he said he watered all his trees, I think it was 400, twice a day for 5 months.
Wow.
It was no accident. He had a beautiful river right by his house. And there were other folks that didn't do so well. They weren't bad. They still hit their targets, but their success rate was significantly less.
The people that stay near the river would outperform the expected targets. When we are estimating the targets, we base on the worst case scenario. So when we expect that only 70% will survive, and the growth rates, how the diameter will be at, especially the diameter, how the diameter will be at age 5, it's normally the poor performing farmers the ones near the river would double. The average for each farmer is expected to be met because the target that was taken was for the poorest of the performer. But when you pull it together, the project together, they normally outperform the targets when you do. And that is the beauty of the multiple land holdings. You diversify. Even when there is a fire, it would catch one farm. Out of the 6,000, it would catch one farm, as opposed to having one continuous plantation. The fire would just go. But the fact that these are multiple land holdings, tiny, in the separations in themselves act as fire lines. So the fire is not that extensive. The system that we are promoting right now is it has every farmer has one long-term management objective, and the rest of the objectives are met from the management requirements. When you're growing trees for timber, when you're growing the majority of Uganda's native trees for timber, the establishment stock density is 400 trees. You factor in the fact that some will die, and then if they don't die, you will have to remove others to allow for that, because you have to make it dense in the beginning so that the trees can grow tall, looking for light. Right. But once they've grown tall, you have to remove some so that they begin increasing in girth. So that is how a timber management system, that is how a timber growing system, timber producing system is managed. So whether you need firewood or not, you will need to remove some of the trees. Whether you need firewood or not, you'll have to prune. So the arrangement here is that they are investing in timber growing, but they meet fuel wood, fodder, and everything else from the offcuts of the tree, or from the byproducts of the tree management requirements.
So the CO2 numbers, for example, you guys have been issued 1.1 million tons through 2016, the most recent annual report. That's a net number. It factors in removals for thinning, and it also factors in removal of branches for firewood. It's a net sequestration.
The majority of the trees, or all the trees, are the long-term management objective is timber. The fuel wood, building poles, and so on and so forth come from the thinnings and the prunings. In the system, in the calculation system, those ones are considered removals. In how the sequestering will happen, the estimates are based on IPCC guidelines.
The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change.
On climate change. Based on the IPCC guidelines, where it's based on long-term averages. So there are fluxes. Actually, if you make that farming system shorter, you will find there is a lot more carbon stored within the first 10 years. But because you do the fluxes, so you end up using the long-term annual average. Is the long-term average over the rotation period of the farming system. And yes, all these removals, first it is even the estimates are conservative. We, for example, only consider above ground biomass.
Right. So
we
no
don't
roots.
consider the roots.
or the soil carbon, where
the soil
leaves
carbon and what have you.
drop.
We don't consider all that. It's just the above ground biomass. And yes, we consider all those removals, so we keep deducting when we put into the model all the removals that are expected from mortality, from pruning, from thinning. The harvest is harvested and kept as timber, yes.
One of the farmers we interviewed the past few days, we asked all the farmers, like, you know, how would they, what's their feedback for the program, how could Ecotrust improve it? One farmer said, you know, they should let us plant different types of trees. I know you require a certain range of...
They do want to grow exotics. They do want to grow eucalyptus and pine because they are the most promoted trees. There is a very good understanding of how pine grows. There is a very good understanding of how eucalyptus grows. And there's a lot of support in the country for those types of trees. They will be able to access seedlings and everything else. We specifically arranged this program for native trees because carbon finance is supposed to facilitate an investment that would never have happened in the absence of carbon finance.
Right.
So quite clearly the native trees are not grown. That is one of the objectives, one of the reasons we do native trees. Secondly, our program tries to provide environmental services. So we would like every dollar to contribute to carbon sequestration, to biodiversity conservation, to agricultural productivity. When you use exotics, especially eucalypts and pines, they cause the farms not to be suitable anymore for other biodiversity. They cause the farms not to be suitable anymore for food production. So because of that interaction between the eucalypts and the pines, we do not use this particular financing mechanism to promote it. And one of the objectives of the project is landscape restoration.
Right.
So we would like the landscape to be restocked with as close to possible as the original vegetation. So it is strictly for that. They prefer, and these farmers, there is no program in Uganda that has had continuous investment in the growing of Uganda's native trees for 15 years as we have, covering more than 6,000 hectares, not even the National Forest Authority. The National Forest Authority has conserved the standing forests, but they've not done any plantations or any woodlots or any mixed native woodlots of indigenous trees. So it is designed intentionally to promote the growing of native trees, to restore as much as possible to what the vegetation used to look like in these areas, to provide as many watershed functions, to provide habitat for as much biodiversity as possible, but also enhance the livelihoods of people through food production and everything else that is associated with a productive landscape.
That was wonderful.
The number one objective that we have as an organization is to make the growing of native trees a worthwhile livelihood strategy. We try to make it outcompete. We bundle the carbon payments with many other things. We provide the extension services, we provide some access to markets, we support the production of honey within the trees. The communities that we work with, we raise their visibility towards other development partners to be able to outcompete the pines and eucalyptus. So I cannot say that we are already there, that it's already more lucrative than the growing of the other trees, but our investments are towards making the farmers prefer the growing of native trees as their land use of choice.
Have you lost any farmers who have decided to exit the program as a result of, I want to grow pine and eucalyptus instead? Is that, I mean, sure, out of 6,000 farmers, you might have, a handful, but is it a structural, issue of any sort or scale?
We've lost farmers as a result of floods. There is a time we had one of the rivers in the Rwenzoris burst over the seams and bringing down rocks and boulders and everything else.
We met,
and quite a few farms were turned into river.
Yeah.
So we lost farms. We have lost just a few farmers over land transfer.
Yeah.
especially death.
Yep.
But there are a few. We've had situations where you find the farmer reducing the size of the land he had earlier on dedicated to tree planting, converting it to tree planting, especially in that escarpment area, the Bunyaruguru, the Lubirizi area, because of the tea industry. Because the tea industry has a very high demand for fuel wood, and like I said, you cannot cut a mahogany to convert it into fuel wood.
Yeah.
So you can't waste such a tree for fuel wood. So they changed their minds. Maybe they had planned to do 2 hectares, and they reduce it to 1 or 1.5 because they've put the other half of a hectare to generating to growing eucalyptus to meet the demand from the tea